GitHub Pages is a web hosting service that GitHub offers to users of its repositories. Additionally, this service is free for public repositories, making it an excellent option for hosting projects. In this example, we are going to see how to deploy the Get Started Astro project from Content Island on GitHub Pages. The first thing we need to deploy this project is a GitHub repository. We open our GitHub account and proceed to create a new one. We give it a name. We are going to make it public to use it for free. And we click directly on the Create button without adding any files. Once created, we copy the URL of the repository we just created and clone it onto our computer in an empty folder using the following command. We open the terminal and type git clone, the copied URL, followed by a space and a dot at the end. We put a dot at the end so that Git does not add an extra folder with the repository name. Now, having cloned the repository with the Astro project, we simply copy the contents of the block folder, site, this one here, into the one we just created. In other words, it should look something like this. And we upload it to the repository using the following commands. Git add, git commit with the initial message, and finally, a git push to publish everything to the main branch. We can see that the project is now uploaded to our GitHub repository. To configure the deployment on GitHub Pages, we need to create a workflow in GitHub Actions. To do this, we create a folder named .github, and inside it, another one called Workflows at the root of the project. And we add a file with any name we choose. I'm going to name it deploy.iml, which is the YAML extension, with the following content. We give the workflow a name, which will help us identify it later in GitHub. We specifically specify when it will run, in this case, each and every time we push to the main branch. And now we simply define a job that we will call deploy. And it will run on an Ubuntu virtual machine system. Since this virtual machine does not have the source code of our project, the first step is to clone the repository. Just as we did on our local machine. To do this, we use a predefined GitHub action called Actions Checkout. And we use version 4. We install the necessary dependencies. Using the command npmc, which uses the package lock JSON file. We execute the build. We upload the build result to an artifact. Using a GitHub action called Action upload pages artifact with version 3, and we specify the folder we want to upload. And finally, we use the action deploy pages. To deploy the artifact on GitHub pages. As stated in the official documentation of the action, it is important to add right permissions for token and pages. So let's add them. Before pushing, it's important to configure a couple of things in the project. On one hand, if we go to the settings section of the repository, in the pages section, we can see that by default, it is set to deploy from a branch. We need to change it to enable deployment from GitHub Actions. On the other hand, remember that when the project build runs, it connects to our Content Island project to retrieve the data for each post. So we need to configure the environment variable, Content Island secret token in the GitHub repository. To do this, we go to Settings, Secrets, Actions, and create a new repository secret. We add the variable and obtain the value provided by Content Island in the General tab. We copy it and paste it into GitHub. Now that we have this secret, we use it as an environment variable in the file, deploy YAML. Therefore, we add a new environment variable. We can use the same name and extract the value from the secrets. Now, we just commit and push to the repository. And we wait for the workflow to execute. As we can see, the process has completed successfully. But we don't know which URL it was deployed to. We can find this URL in the settings section under pages of the repository. If we want it to appear in the workflow itself when it finishes, we can update the file. Deploy YAML. We identify the deploy step with an ID. And we add an environment with any name we choose. And the URL provided by that step. It is available as an output in the page URL property. Now, if we just push to the repository again, we will see that when the workflow finishes, the URL where it has been deployed appears. Although it seems that everything is ready, if we navigate to any post, we see that it does not display correctly. This is because by default, GitHub Pages uses the repository name as the base URL where the application is deployed. That is, if you deploy multiple applications with the same GitHub account, each one will be deployed in a different path, each with its repository name. But all of them will share the same domain name. Visit username.github.io. To solve this issue, Astro allows us to configure the base property either in the astro.config base file or from the command line. And if we modify this property, it is necessary to use the environment variable import.meta.env.base URL when navigating to a path in any href. Therefore, we are going to update the workflow build. Now we need to pass an extra option to this command. So we use the double dash to be able to pass all the arguments we want. In this case, the argument base. And as a value, we need to pass the repository name. If we want this workflow to be as generic as possible so that it works for any project, we can use the configure pages action from GitHub. This is the action. In its version 5, which as an output provides us with the project's base URL. Next, we update all the hrefs in the project so that they use the environment variable import.meta.env.base URL as the base URL. That is, we update the index.astro file. And simply prepend that variable. We copy this and use it everywhere, including in the file header Astro. Over here, we copy this, and here in these three places. We can now push to the repository and check if it works correctly. Let's check it. Let's go to the Actions panel. It has already been deployed here, and that's it. Now we have our project with Content Islands and Astro deployed on GitHub Pages.